A thick mist curled over the emerald hills of Rengma, winding through the dense forest like whispers of forgotten ancestors. The village, nestled in the heart of this untouched wilderness, thrived on the stories passed down through generations. Among them was the tale of the fruit that made babies, a rare, golden-hued fruit said to grow only once a decade on an ancient tree hidden deep within the jungle. Those who ate it together, the elders claimed, would be bound by fate, their love made unbreakable, their lineage ensured by the blessing of the land itself. Ariv listened to the story with the quiet fascination of a man drawn to the unknown. He had arrived in Rengma weeks ago, ostensibly for research, though the truth was far more complicated. As an ethnographer, his work involved documenting oral traditions, but his heart had led him here for reasons he struggled to name. He felt something in this place, a connection, a pull, as if the land itself whispered to him. Yet, what intrigued him most was not the legend, nor even the village's resistance to sharing its secrets with outsiders. It was Mira. She had been the one to tell him the tale of the fruit, her voice carrying the weight of someone who did not simply repeat stories but believed them. There was an intensity in her dark eyes, something quiet yet unyielding, like a river cutting through stone. She was not like the others in the village, who eyed Ariv with wary politeness. Mira was different, curious, perceptive, yet bound to her home by something deeper than duty. The night they first spoke, a festival had set the village alight with laughter and music. The scent of burning incense and roasting maize lingered in the air. Seated by the fire, Mira had glanced at him as the elders spoke of the fruit, their voices steeped in reverence. Later, when the others had left, she remained. "You shouldn't be so eager to chase myths," she had said, her tone half warning, half teasing. "And yet you tell it as if it were real," he had replied. She had smiled then, a brief, knowing curve of her lips. "Because to us it is." From that night, a fragile thread of understanding wove itself between them. Ariv sought knowledge, Mira possessed it. But the village watched them closely, whispering that he was an outsider, that she was too close to him, that the fruit's tale was not meant for strangers. Days passed, and Ariv found himself drawn deeper into the mystery, not just of the legend, but of Mira herself. She carried the weight of expectation on her shoulders, the quiet burden of one who belonged wholly to a place that did not allow for deviation. She was expected to marry a man of the village, to uphold the traditions of her ancestors. And yet, she lingered at the edges of Ariv's presence, her caution warring with curiosity. One evening, by the river where the fireflies flickered like embers against the dark, she spoke of the fruit again. "My grandmother told me it is guarded by the forest," she murmured, tracing patterns in the damp earth. "Not just by beasts, but by the spirits of those who once sought it and failed." Ariv leaned in slightly. "And those who succeeded?" Mira hesitated. "They were changed." "Changed how?" She looked at him then, her expression unreadable. "They never left each other's side. Some say they disappeared into the forest. Others say their love grew so strong, they became part of the land itself." Ariv exhaled softly. "And you believe this?" "I believe," she said slowly, "that some things are not meant to be understood, only accepted." There was something in her voice that made his chest tighten, a quiet plea, or perhaps a warning. He should have let it go, should have allowed the legend to remain untouched. But the thought of it gnawed at him, the way unsolved mysteries always did. He wanted to find the fruit. More than that, he wanted to find it with her. The village, however, had grown uneasy. The elders spoke in hushed voices, glancing at Mira as if she had already strayed too far from the path expected of her. A woman like her, one tied so deeply to the land, had no place entwining herself with an outsider. She was meant for tradition, for a life rooted in the stories they had preserved for centuries. And so, when whispers of Ar's questions reached them, a warning came. "You will not seek the fruit," one elder told him, his voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "Some knowledge is not meant for those who do not belong." Ariv did not argue. but Mira saw the defiance in his eyes. That night, as the village settled into sleep, she found him standing at the edge of the forest, his gaze lost in the darkness. "If you go," she said softly, "you must understand that the fruit is not just a thing to be found. It is a choice." He turned to her, searching her face for the meaning behind her words. "You can't go alone," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The forest will not allow it." Ariv felt something shift between them, something fragile and unspoken. "Then come with me." Mira did not answer right away, but when she did, it was not with words. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing his for the briefest moment before pulling away. A silent promise, a warning, a beginning. The night was thick with silence when they set out, the village asleep behind them. Mira led the way, her steps sure despite the darkness, her presence like a shadow moving through the trees. Ariv followed, his pulse steady but charged with anticipation. The air was dense with the scent of damp earth and distant rain, the undergrowth whispering beneath their feet as they wove deeper into the jungle. Ariv had spent days convincing Mira to guide him, though even now, he wasn't certain she had agreed willingly. There had been no final declaration, no certainty, only the moment she had met his gaze by the forest's edge, her hesitation a battle against something greater than fear. Then she had turned and walked, and he had understood. This was a path she had always known she would take. The jungle swallowed them whole, closing behind them like a secret being kept. The deeper they ventured, the more the world of men seemed to fade. Trees towered, their ancient limbs curling toward the sky, their trunks marked with symbols that spoke of old warnings. Leaves dripped with moisture, the air alive with the humming of unseen creatures. Somewhere far off, the low growl of a predator rumbled and then disappeared, as if the forest itself had silenced it. Mira moved with quiet precision, her fingers brushing against bark, against vines, as if listening for directions. She had always known these lands, but this journey was different. There was no map path, no well-worn trail. The fruit did not reveal itself to those who sought it out of mere curiosity. It had to call you. Ariv walked beside her, watchful but unafraid. He had grown up in cities where light drowned the stars, where the only mysteries were the ones humans created for themselves. Here, the unknown was not a question to be solved, but a presence to be accepted. He could feel it in the way the wind shifted, in the way the trees seemed to lean closer, listening. After hours of walking, they reached the first marker, a stone half buried in the earth, its surface covered in carvings. Mira knelt beside it, tracing her fingers over the symbols. "This is where they turned back," she murmured. "Who?" Ariv asked, crouching beside her. She glanced at him. "Those who came before us. Those who were not ready." Ariv studied the stone, the lines etched deep into its surface. Stories locked in rock, warnings left behind. "And how do we know if we're ready?" Mira exhaled slowly. "We keep going." They rose, continuing their journey. The jungle thickened around them, the air heavier, pressing against their skin. Time stretched, indistinct. There was no telling how long they walked before they reached the river. The water was dark, shifting like liquid shadow under the dim light of the moon. No bridge, no shallow crossing. The current was silent but deep, as if it had never known the need for noise. Mira knelt by the edge, cupping a handful of water and letting it slip through her fingers. "This is the first test," she said. Ariv frowned. "A test?" She nodded. "The river does not let just anyone pass." He glanced up and down the banks. "Is there another way across?" Mira shook her head. "Only through." Ariv studied the water. It was still, yet something about it felt alive, watchful. He stepped forward, removing his shoes, feeling the cold press of mud against his feet. Without hesitation, he waded in. The water climbed his legs, chilling his skin, but he pushed forward. Halfway across, something changed. The riverbed beneath him shifted, vanishing. The ground was no longer there, and suddenly he was sinking. A sharp gasp left his throat as the water swallowed him whole. Darkness closed in, thick and suffocating. He kicked upward, but the surface seemed farther away than it had been just moments ago. Panic surged, but before he could fully succumb to it, a hand grasped his wrist. Mira. She pulled, her strength surprising, her grip unyielding. The moment their skin touched, the river seemed to release its hold, and together, they surfaced, gasping for air. Ariv clung to the edge of the bank, coughing, and when he looked at her, she was already watching him. "It let you go," she said softly. Ariv shivered, not from the cold, but from something else. "Because of you." Mira didn't respond, only stood, offering him her hand once more. This time, he took it without hesitation. The jungle did not get easier after the river. The terrain twisted, thick with roots that threatened to trip them, shadows that seemed to stretch in impossible ways. Time blurred, hunger and exhaustion pressing at their edges, but neither spoke of turning back. Then at last the air shifted. The trees parted, and before them stood the tree. It was unlike anything Ariv had ever seen. Its bark the color of deep amber, its branches stretched toward the sky like frozen lightning. And hanging from its limbs, cradled in golden leaves, were the fruits. They glowed, not with any light that could be explained, but with something deeper, something alive. The sight of them stole the breath from his lungs. Mira stepped forward, reverence in her every movement. "This is it." Ariv moved to stand beside her, his voice hushed. "What happens now?" She turned to him, something unreadable in her gaze. "Now we choose." He frowned. "Choose what?" She lifted her hand, but did not reach for the fruit. "Once we take it, there's no undoing it." Ariv studied her face. Searching for the meaning, she did not speak. Mira exhaled, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we eat it together, we are bound." Ariv felt his heartbeat in his throat. "Bound?" She looked at him, then truly looked at him, as if seeing something beyond flesh, beyond time. "Our fates will be sealed. Love or ruin, there will be no escape." The jungle around them was silent, waiting. Ariv reached out, his fingers hovering over the fruit. Then he looked at her. "Are you afraid?" he asked. Mira's lips parted, but no words came. The fruit hung between them, gleaming like a promise, or a curse that Ariv's fingers brushed against the fruit's smooth surface, and a warmth spread through his fingertips, unlike anything he had ever felt. It was as if the fruit pulsed, alive, recognizing the weight of the choice before them. He hesitated, his breath shallow, his gaze shifting to Mira. She stood still, her dark eyes reflecting the soft glow of the fruit, her hands clenched at her sides. She had warned him. Once they ate, there would be no turning back. Ariv plucked the fruit from its branch. The jungle did not protest. No wind howled. No unseen force intervened. But the silence that followed was absolute, thick with expectation. He turned, holding it between them. Mira swallowed hard. "If we do this, our fates are no longer ours alone." He nodded, understanding yet unable to step away. The fruit rested in his palm, impossibly light, yet it carried the weight of something eternal. Slowly, he raised it to his lips and took a bite. The taste was unlike anything he had known, sweet yet sharp, rich yet fleeting. The moment it touched his tongue, warmth bloomed through his body, coursing through his veins like fire and water, as if something inside him had awakened. He exhaled shakily, his vision momentarily blurring. Mira watched, her breath shallow. Then, before doubt could root itself, she took the fruit from his hands and bit into it. The moment she did, the world around them changed. The jungle, once still and patient, trembled. Leaves shuddered, branches swayed despite the absence of wind. The very ground beneath them pulsed like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient. A whisper, low and reverent, curled through the air, though no voice spoke it. Ariv staggered, the warmth within him turning electric, racing through his limbs like a storm. His mind swam with images he did not recognize, faces he had never seen, places he had never been. Mira gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as if to steady her own unraveling. And then, as suddenly as it began, the storm within them settled. The jungle stilled. The fruit, now only a hollowed core, fell from Ariv's fingers and disappeared into the earth. Mira's breathing was uneven. She met his gaze, and in that moment, they both knew. Something had changed. When they turned back toward the village, the journey felt different. The jungle no longer pressed against them as it had before, no longer watching them with suspicion. It had accepted them, or perhaps it had marked them. The path that had once been treacherous now unfolded before them with eerie ease, the obstacles that had slowed them before mysteriously absent. But as they neared the village, an unease settled over them. Even before they stepped beyond the tree line, they could hear it, the murmurs, the voices laced with urgency and fear. The villagers were waiting. Torches burned in the dark, casting flickering shadows across tense faces. The elders stood at the center, their expressions unreadable, their eyes sharp as they fell upon Mira and Ariv. The moment they emerged, a hush settled over the gathered crowd. The eldest among them stepped forward, his gaze heavy with the weight of generations. "You have done what was forbidden." Mira did not lower her eyes. "We have done what was destined." The elder's jaw tightened, but something flickered in his expression, something uncertain. He turned his gaze to Ariv. "And you," he said, "you do not belong to this land. You have taken what was not meant for you." Ariv met his stare, his pulse steady. "I did not take it. It was given." A murmur rippled through the villagers. Some with shock, others with something closer to wonder. Another elder, a woman with silver in her hair, studied them with sharp, knowing eyes. "Do you understand what you have done?" Mira's fingers brushed against Ariv's, a silent tether grounding them both. "We are bound," she said. The woman nodded slowly, as if this answer had long been expected. "Then it has begun." Ariv frowned. "What has begun?" The elder sighed, her voice softer now. "The fruit does not simply grant fertility, nor does it only bind two souls in love. It chooses those who will carry its legacy forward, those who will protect the balance between what was and what will be." Ariv's chest tightened. "You mean, you are no longer just yourselves?" she interrupted. "The fruit has marked you as its own." Mira inhaled sharply. "What does that mean for us?" The elder studied them a moment longer before answering. "It means your story is no longer just yours to tell." A silence stretched between them, filled with things too vast to grasp. Ariv felt the weight of the moment settle into his bones. He had come here seeking knowledge, seeking truth, but he had found something far greater, far more binding. Mira, beside him, stood unyielding, her gaze no longer questioning but resolute. The villagers watched, some with fear, some with awe, but none with doubt. The fruit had chosen, and the fruit had never chosen wrong. Ariv reached for Mira's hand, and this time she did not pull away. The night air was thick with the scent of earth, of torches burning low, of stories yet to be written. Their fates were no longer their own, and neither of them would have it any other way.